People often say that when it comes to awards like the Game Awards, sequels always start with a disadvantage. Especially when the original game was a huge success, no matter how good the sequel is, it somehow never feels like it receives the same level of recognition. Is it fair? Honestly, I'm not sure. But when we look back at famous game sequels, a pattern becomes very clear. Most sequels, no matter how impressive their graphics or gameplays are, struggle to recreate the impact of the original. Matching the first game is already considered a victory. Surpassing it is extremely rare. And when the original has already been labeled as masterpiece, expecting the sequel to reach even higher almost feels impossible. This is what I want to talk about today, the curse of sequels. When the first game is truly great, expectations for its sequel become dangerously high. Keeping the same level is no longer enough. Players want more. They want something deeper, bigger, and better in every possible way. But here's the problem. Our judgment is never fully objective. It is heavily influenced by our expectations. If you expect a game to be average and it somehow exceeds your expectation, you feel like it's a masterpiece. But if you already expect it to be a masterpiece, even a tiny flaw makes you feel so disappointed. And when a game actually reaches that masterpiece level, you don't feel that amazed. You just simply think, well, that's how it's supposed to be. This is why many sequels will be considered masterpieces if they want sequels. But once they carried that title, once they carried that burden, they lost part of their magic. Take Tears of the Kingdom as an example. If it were released as a standalone Zelda open-world game, it would easily be considered an industry benchmark. Its expansion of freedom, its redesign of exploration and puzzle systems are all textbook-level achievements. Without Breath of the Wild before it, it could certainly be placed on the pedestal. But because Breath of the Wild gave players such a wonderful first experience, Tears of the Kingdom, no matter how brilliant it was, feels less shocking. Not because it's worse, but only because we're already prepared to be impressed. There's another reason why sequels feel different. We're not the same people anymore. When we say we miss an old game, we're often not missing the game itself. Sometimes we're just missing who we were when we played it. A game can recreate mechanics, it can recreate systems, it can even recreate art style, but it can never recreate a state of mind. It cannot recreate the time in your life, your age, your stress, your responsibilities, your experience. All of these change how you feel when you play. And yet, we keep hoping that sequel can give us the same emotional impact. That hope itself is the problem. Because when it fails, we don't blame the time, we blame the game. We start to believe the sequel is not good enough, not surprising enough, not magical enough. Meanwhile, we slowly turn the original into something perfect in our memory. We forget its flaws, we forget its limitations, and we judge the sequel with standards the original never had to face. This is nostalgia. And with that filter on, every sequel starts the race already behind. The original is no longer just a game, it becomes a symbol, a memory, a piece of time that we can never return to. How can any sequel compete with that? For developers, the nostalgia is kind of like a double-edged sword. It's both a curse and a gift. On one side, a very successful original guarantees the fan base, attentions and sales, etc. And on the other hand, it creates an impossible challenge. Because if the sequel sticks to the original, people might call it lazy. If it changes too much, people say it lost its original charm. There's no perfect answer for that. Should the classic combat system stay exactly the same or evolve for modern audiences? Should the beloved character remain familiar or grow into someone new? Every decision risks disappointing someone. Developers are walking on the tightrope. On one side, old players and their memories. On the other side, new players and their expectations. One wrong step, the both sides turn away. This is why the fate of a sequel is so complicated. It carries the glory of the past, and the pressure of the future. It must honor history while also creating something new. It must survive in the loud market and also prove its value under the weight of nostalgia. So how should we as players look at sequels? Maybe instead of treating sequel as a product that must surpass the original, we can just treat it as a totally separate individual game that's happened in the same world of the original. I often ask this question. If you think the sequel doesn't surpass the original, imagine if the sequel actually came first and the original came later as the sequel in the parallel universe. Would you still think the same? Would you still think that the sequel is not as good or not as amazing as the first one? That's a question we should always ask ourselves if we want to actually objectively judge how good the sequel is. So, now I want to ask you, is there any sequel that in your heart truly surpassed its original? A sequel that became your new favorite? A sequel that changed how you see the series? Share that in the comments. Let's talk about it together. And thanks for watching.